Mark chapter 5, verses 1 through 20. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of Gerasene. And when they had stepped out of the boat, immediately a man came out of the tomb with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him more, even with a chain. For he had often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces. And no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was howling and bruising himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him. And he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you, by God, do not torment me." For he said to him, "Come out of this man, you unclean spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." He begged him earnestly not to be sent out of the country. Now there on the hillside, a great herd of swine was feeding, and the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us to the swine, let us enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirit came out and entered the swine. And the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down a steep bank into the sea, and they were drowned in the sea. The swineherds ran off and told it to the city and the country. Then people came to see what had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the demonic man sitting there, clothed in his right mind, and the very man who had been with the legion. They were afraid. Those who had seen what had happened to the demonic man and to the swine reported it. They began to beg Jesus to leave their neighborhood. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed by demons begged him that he might be with him. But Jesus refused and said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you." And he went away and proclaimed in Decapolis just how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Good and gracious God, thank you so much for bringing us together today. Be with me in the words that I say and in the things that I do, and be with us as an entire church community, God. We pray this all in your Son's name. Amen. So when I was 21, I worked at this camp called Deer Creek. It was out in West Texas. I try not to start every time I preach by telling a camp story, because that's what I do every time. But when I was out there, I know. I had two friends out there who were dating, and I basically became the in-between. I became the relationship counselor at camp. And so they kept coming up to me, and they kept complaining about things that they were having an argument about. Of course, one of the things that I eventually caught on to was that their stories aren't lining up. Like, they both clearly have a very different perspective on what's happening. So I finally just flat out asked, "Hey, have you talked to the other person about this?" And you can probably guess the answer was no. Yeah, crazy how that works, right? So they were in this long argument over this thing that both of them didn't understand why they were arguing, right? They were both arguing from a different point of view. Sometimes I think when we're in danger or when we're in trouble, it can be hard for us to go directly to the source. It can be hard for us to go directly to what's causing that stress and have a conversation with them, right? The man in this passage doesn't seem to have that problem. Jesus gets off a boat and he sees Jesus and he goes, "That's what I need." And he walks up to the guy and he starts begging him to heal him. This is incredibly powerful. He just walks up to him and starts doing it. He immediately asks the question, "What have you to do with me?" He's immediately searching for help, for some kind of guidance, for anything that Jesus can offer him. I think a lot of the times we beat around the bush in our personal life. I think that I constantly am scared to open up to the people around me for fear that maybe I'll tell them something and I'll feel more isolated afterwards. Maybe I'll tell them something and they'll fear that I'm oversharing, maybe a fear of rejection. But something that I've learned in my short time here is that whenever I actually go and talk to people and I bring up my problems or things that I'm struggling with, most of the time the people around me who love me are more than willing to help or at least listen. I think that's something that can be really hard for us to process. I'll use an example. My roommate David, I've lived with David for 5 years. He was one of my best friends. I grew up with him. We went to middle school together. And about once a year, we have our very manly heart-to-heart conversation where we talk about everything that's been going wrong in our lives for the last year. Maybe we should do that more often, but we'll see. Something that I realize is whenever we have those conversations, he's struggling with something that I could help him with. And normally when I'm struggling with something, he could help me. But now both of us are either too proud or too scared to go talk to the other person. Maybe we don't want to reveal things about ourselves. Really nice benefit of God is God already knows what we're going through. Whenever we go to him with our problem, he actually already knows what our problem is. We don't have to worry about, maybe, are we going to use the right words to describe the problem? We don't have to sit there and overthink those things. I constantly, whenever I pray to God, I had a friend a long time ago who explained to me that whenever you pray to God, you're not praying to God in English or Spanish or French or whatever your language is. You're actually praying to God in Avery. And you're praying in Karen, right? We're praying in our own language so that these miscommunications that we have person to person don't happen with God, because God understands what our problem is. He understands what we're trying to say. So whenever we mess up our words, he gets that. He understands what we're trying to say. So the issue comes on the other side of that. There's responses to our prayers, right? We should know that sometimes the answer to our prayer is no. That's very uncomfortable. It's typically not the answer we're looking for when we go to God with something. But sometimes it is the right answer. Sometimes it's yes. I've shared the story with a few people. When I started working here, I reached out to my old boss, Allie, and it was right at the beginning of COVID. I reached out to her and I'd said, is any church in the diocese looking for a youth minister? And in my head, I was like, this is going to take probably 4 to 6 months. Amy Case called me 30 minutes later. It was incredibly fast, it was incredibly quick, and to a point where it allowed me to realize, I think God's talking to me right now. I think God is He's throwing me a raft, he's throwing me some kind of help here, and I need to take this. It doesn't matter if at the moment I don't know what I'm getting into, or it might be uncomfortable in the moment, but God is giving me a very clear path to where I need to be, and sometimes I need to do that. The real issue is that sometimes we ask God for help, and then he takes our problem and he casts into 2,000 pigs, and then those pigs run off a cliff into the local lake. And that's hard to decipher. There's a lot of things that are in there. I'm not going to pretend to know exactly what happens there, right? I'm not going to pretend to know why we have to handle the situation that way. But I know there's been long, complicated issues that I've had in my life that when I look back, I can see God working through them. There's times where I look back and at the moment I felt like I was alone, but I can look back and I can see God was actually there with me the whole time, and I can see how he was working through those moments. And I can see my friends were actually there with me the whole time. I was just too scared to tell them what my problem was. A lot of the times we just need to ask. Something that the man in this passage does really well. Would Jesus have healed this man if he walked up to Jesus and didn't reveal his problem to him? If he never shared his problem with Jesus? Jesus might have still healed this man, right? But I don't think it hurts him to ask. We should go to Jesus with our problem. We should ask him what that is. We should talk to our friends around us. And we should bring our problems to God firsthand. Amen?
Amen.